You recognize that the only reason you have a microphone and you have a show is because feminists complained, because we wanted a voice.
That's not true. You saying something on a podcast doesn't change the amount of men that die every year in a crab fishing boat. If men's jobs disappeared tomorrow, society would crumble. If women's jobs disappeared tomorrow, society would be fine.
Our society has been stagnated and has been held back because women have been held back.
What do you think men did historically? Like, what do you think their jobs were?
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to be watching Pearl debating an unbelievably delusional, cringe, and just virtue signaling feminist. Some of the points brought up by the feminist here are just the worst. So guys, with that, a lot to cover in this one. Let's get into it.
If men's jobs disappeared tomorrow, society would crumble. If women's jobs disappeared tomorrow, society would be fine.
Oh, really? Who's going to raise all the children?
Do you think society discriminates more against men or women, or do you think it's equal?
I think that they discriminate more against women, but that's not to say that men aren't discriminated against in some aspects.
Okay, how are women more discriminated against?
As I've said before, in my own personal experience and statistically.
Other than, can we do something other than just people say mean words to me? Because men, by the time they're 22, somebody said a mean word to them. Usually it's a woman. So anything other than somebody said something I don't like.
Abortion bans. Can you name a law that controls what men can do and access healthcare and the healthcare that men can access? Mm-hmm. Is there any laws that control men's healthcare access? Well,
if you want to talk about men's body, men are required to go into selective service. So if there is a wartime, they are required to be drafted.
Yeah, and I think that the draft should be abolished.
So you asked for a law, there's a law. There's a way that women's bodies aren't protected. There's a way men's bodies aren't protected.
No, so it's actually, my question was different. My question was, can you name a law that restricts men's access to healthcare?
That restricts men's access to healthcare? No, not off the top of my head.
So there you go. That's one discriminatory
practice. How are women
practice.
Restricted access to healthcare? You can drive to another state and get an abortion.
Yeah, well, then that's also not taking into account like socioeconomic factors, right? Because not every person has the ability or the funds or the time to be able to just cross state lines to gain access. We shouldn't have different healthcare access in different states. Your geographical location should not determine your access to a human right.
Okay, well, again, luckily for women, we have access to birth control, abstinence, and even you can even track your cycle and not get pregnant. So I think there's plenty of options beforehand that it really isn't an excuse if you have an unplanned pregnancy.
So actually about 50% of unplanned pregnancies used protection. And so that's just an incorrect statement.
Then you should learn to use it better.
Then you should learn to use it better. Exactly. Plus, even if you do have sex with protection, you are still running that risk. You don't get to kill the baby if the condom breaks. Sorry. Anyways, this feminist is sneaking in a few very loaded presuppositions here. First and foremost, being that abortion is healthcare. The second of which being that healthcare is a human right. So then to her, abortion is a human right. What exactly does she mean by human right, and how would abortion fall into that category, I wonder? Third, she's saying it's all about women's bodies. Well, actually, no. You're carrying the DNA and the body of another human being. So besides in rare cases, you've had sex of your own volition and then you are responsible for that creation. So anyways, Pearl's argument for the draft in terms of bodily autonomy is much, much stronger than this feminist's, because the government can actually send you to die on the front lines of a war. It's happened many times throughout history. It's happening currently in Eastern Europe, and it will happen in the West again. But of course, the feminist wants to move the goalposts, but Pearl does pick up on it very soon. So let's move on. But before we get there, guys, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this sort of content.
And the other thing is, after the kid's born, you could argue that it's an equally irresponsible move when men and women have unprotected sex or there's some problem with the birth control. Fine, equally irresponsible. But after the woman has more control, she has the right to she's the only one who gets to decide if she takes a plan B. She's the only one that gets to decide to put him on child support or alimony if they're married. Men don't have a right to their wallets after the kid is born.
Yeah, so pregnancy involves your body and your internal organs, and that is worth more than any money.
Yeah, but that's 9 months a year. What about the rest of the time? What about 18 years after?
Right. And so then there's like 2 years after that you're breastfeeding. And then there's the unequal division of childcare and domestic labor. So it's so much more than 9 months. But to go back, we cannot minimize that 9 months. Having your body be not your own for 9 months is 9 months too long.
Yeah, but there are men dying when they go and do their jobs. And
They
they're
can get a
not
different job.
complaining about it.
They can get a different job.
No, because men understand that somebody has to do it.
Yeah, they don't have to do it.
They understand. Well, that's why it's admirable that they do it anyway and they don't complain. And that's what I keep going back to is what feminists tend to want is they want all of the credit and they want to over exaggerate their problems.
So I would actually like to go back to the comparison you made of pregnancy and men going to work. Do you think those two things are the same?
I think that a man going to a dangerous job is far worse than a woman being pregnant.
And do you think that the majority of men
Far
work-
more dangerous, I'll say. That's more accurate. Better and good is like, it's subjective, right?
Yeah. And as I've said before, I think that we should have better safety protocols and we should improve the safety of all workers. So I think that should be addressed. But also the majority of men...
but it isn't, right? Like,
Right, but are you arguing for it to be?
Here's the difference. Okay, so feminists have a tendency to think that if we complain, things will just happen. And I'm more realistic, where I know that just because we say, oh, it should be better, well, it's not.
So,
And men understand that because they have had to deal with that reality from a young age.
you recognize that the only reason you have a microphone and you have a show is because feminists complained because we wanted a voice.
That's
because
not true.
It actually is.
It's not true. There's writers, there's female writers in the 1800s, 1700s,
and they had to
and
write under
1600s.
male pseudonyms.
It's not true.
It is true.
It's not true.
Well, you can say it's not true, but it's history
That's not true.
and it's statistics.
That's not true.
It is. We used
There
to
were
not
women
have
in
a
power.
voice.
We had Cleopatra. We had women in power throughout all of history. There are examples of them.
When were
The
women?
first female property owner was in the 1600s in the United States.
When were women allowed to have their own bank accounts?
Women were allowed to have their own bank accounts in what does that have to do with writing? You're changing the topic.
No, I'm not.
You're changing the topic because I'm right. They were
No.
allowed to write. They were.
You're the one who brought up female writers. That wasn't the question.
Go ahead.
She is definitely moving the goalposts. Pearl is right to pick that one up. But the argument about pregnancy, coal miner.
13 miners died when part of the mine roof collapsed and caused a methane gas explosion.
Is just unbelievable, and it's just the perfect example of the parasitic nature of the feminist ideology. You know, a lot of women actually find the process of pregnancy enjoyable. They're bringing life into the world and they recognize the beauty in that. And yes, there's pain and sacrifice involved, but the amazing things that come of that sacrifice make it worth it and enjoyable in many cases. It's only feminists that look at child rearing as oppressive for women. I mean, sane women look at pregnancy as a blessing and a miracle. So the whole concept of comparing that to hard labor is just insane. But this, once again, is just such a good encapsulation of the feminist ideology. They view motherhood and family as the oppressive structure that women must break free of in order to be liberated. This is the very crux of the feminist ideology, and it's just so dark. And you guys can extrapolate this for yourself and just imagine the consequences of this happening on a society. Oh, actually, that is exactly what has happened over the last 100 years. Anyways, let's move on.
Go ahead. So sometime in the 1900s, I can't remember the year.
Yeah, it was like in the 1970s is when women were allowed to have bank accounts. So when we're talking about women...
What's happened since we got bank accounts? We own 80% of the world's debt. There's a reason people did things the way they did.
You don't think that women should be able to have their own bank accounts?
I don't think they shouldn't have bank accounts. I think everyone should have the right, and they do. But there's a reason. I think when we look at the past, we have to look at the reason that people did things. And one of the reasons is women are very irresponsible with money. They own 80% of the world's debt, even though they make less money than men.
So did you know that the majority of household finances are regulated and controlled by women?
Yeah, I knew that. We make 80% of consumer buying decisions.
Yeah.
So that's what I said. They spend.
And you
That's what I said. They
Right,
spend money.
because
They spend money
households-
they don't have.
we do have the money.
Not anymore. I mean, the average woman out of college has $30,000 worth. How much debt do you have? You have to have six figures coming out of
I
med
do have
school.
6 figures
Yeah,
of debt,
exactly.
and the student debt. Yeah, because
And
if
the
you,
thing is, in your profession, I mean, on average, women leave the medical profession when they have a kid or within 5 years. So odds are you won't pay it off. And it makes, I'm not saying you personally, I hope you do, right? I'm not wishing it one way or another, but statistically, women make their debt someone else's problem.
men do the same thing.
No, they don't. So they looked at women paying off their debt and men paying off their college debt, and men have been making payments towards it the last 5 years and women haven't.
So it's funny because you just mentioned how women will leave their careers because they have to take care of children. And that probably plays a large role into why they're not able to pay back their student debt compared to men who continue to be a part of the workforce even after they have children. Do you see how those two things might be correlated?
No, because women aren't having kids anymore. That would have
We
been the
are.
case, maybe the case before, but now they're not really having children.
We are still having children. That's
On
an incorrect
average,
statement.
it's like 1.5 now. So, I mean, you have one kid, you can put it in daycare, you can still work.
You can put it in daycare.
Sorry, his or her.
Yeah. See, and this is the problem is when we see people as commodities instead of actual people, that's where we run into this thing of I don't care how you feel, you make stupid decisions, instead of taking a nuanced perspective and the complexity of the human experience and recognizing that there are so many things that contribute into these cherry-picked statistics.
Okay, so I just have to point out the almost unbelievable lack of self-awareness and the irony of her being very quick to call Pearl out for dehumanizing language towards children when she is literally advocating for the mass slaughter of children. But I guess for her, they don't really become children until she can see them. And Pearl is also right when it comes to student debt. Women rack up most of the student debt in psychology and sociology and gender studies, whereas men tend to go into the STEM fields and get degrees in areas that will actually be profitable in the marketplace. And yes, women do leave the workforce, but what does that show? It just shows that getting higher education for women is much more risky. It's risky because if they do want to start a family, which let's just be honest, all women deep down want to actually have a family, then if you dedicate your fertile years to having a career, it may well stop you from achieving that goal. Anyways, the point about women being better with money as well, I mean, the fact that they make 80% of consumer decisions, but they earn significantly less than men, what does that tell you? It tells you that they're pretty good at spending and not so good at earning. But anyways, this feminist just never concedes a point, obviously, and tries to move on and move the goalposts every time she is disproved. So let's move on now to just a cringe virtue signal.
Well, you think that the world owes you understanding, and it doesn't.
I think that it does. I think that we owe everybody understanding. I think that in order for me, so you know what? I think that this is something we need to clarify.
Yeah, go ahead.
I partake in these conversations because I want a better world. I develop my opinions based on how I think or based on what I think is going to improve the human condition and improve people's quality of life. Why do you take part in these conversations?
I like to report on what's going on.
Okay, so you have no desire to improve the world and to be an advocate for change and progression.
It would be nice, but I don't expect it.
See, and for me, one of my favorite quotes is, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And you can call me a dreamer.
They're the ones who do not.
I mean, historically, you're wrong.
I don't think so.
Martin Luther King had a dream, didn't he?
Okay, but how many guys tried to be Martin Luther King and failed? I'm not
Right.
saying there
And
aren't people,
that's a societal issue because we resist progression, and you're one of the people who is allowing society to resist progression instead of allowing progression to happen.
How am I allowing society to? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so you.
Okay, no, go ahead. Go ahead. It's fine.
Yeah, because you say, I see the reality right now and I report on the reality right now. And when I say, yeah, we should recognize what's happening now and improve on it, you say, oh, men are dying in the workplace. And I'm like, okay, let's address that. Let's see why they're doing that. Let's see how we can improve on that. And then you're like, yeah, That's not realistic. I live in reality. Where you see how I am advocating for progression. I'm advocating for improvement. Where you're just like, yeah, you know what? That's not the world we live in. And I don't have any idea or any desire to improve on the shitty statistics that I constantly report on.
Yeah, so I think that sounds nice, but again, it doesn't change the reality of the situation. So you saying something on a podcast doesn't change the amount of men that die every year in a crab fishing boat. But what I like to do is be as accurate as I possibly can. And that is why I say that women do not do as useful or as needed jobs in society as men do. If men's jobs disappeared tomorrow, society would crumble. If women's jobs disappeared tomorrow, society would be fine.
Oh, really? Who's going to raise all the children?
Women aren't even raising their own kids. They're in daycare.
That's actually incorrect.
They're in daycare and public school. It's a $1 billion industry.
It is a $1 billion industry, but statistically, women have the majority of childcare burden. And not a lot of people can afford daycare nowadays.
Okay, so her rebuttal to Pearl here about the importance difference in women's and men's jobs is quite telling. Who's going to raise the children, she says. All of the women who are no longer working will be raising their children, doing a great job of it. I mean, parenting is not a job. It's not something that you get hired and paid for. It's a duty, and it's a very noble and honorable duty. Much more honorable than writing emails or interior design, one might say. And it's just a fact that in the hypothetical world where all of men's jobs disappear and all of women's jobs disappear, the men's jobs disappear, we are screwed. The women's jobs disappear, and we have a temporary shortage of nurses and a lot of women raising their children. And I'm not even saying that that's what should happen. I mean, I do think that people should have choice before people freak out and mistake my is claim for an ought claim. But anyways, nothing is more laughable than when these feminists, who have absolutely no idea how the world works, are sitting there saying that they are advocating. They're doing so much advocating and they're going to be the change in the world. Yeah, why don't you go and spend some time on one of those crab fishing boats that you're advocating so hard about and see why it is that men actually die in this line of work. The reason that they die is because it's extremely dangerous and accidents are unavoidable, even though they take the utmost precaution and try and avoid these accidents at all costs. But the fact of the matter is that society, as it is at the moment, needs these industries. And there are going to be men who fulfill these duties, and they should at least just be given some credit.
Especially in the first 2 to 6 months of life, at least, like women bear the majority of that labor.
Sure. But I say, so what?
I could say that to any...
Men bear the majority of labor of running society for a lifetime. On average, women have 1 to 2 kids. So, okay, you could say that's 4 years. Men work 50. 50 in a difficult job that gives us the food that we have, the chairs we're sitting on, and the microphone we're talking in.
And who set that system up?
You should say thank you. Men did. Thank God for them.
No, you seem to have a problem with the amount that men work and the responsibility that men bear. And so
I don't have a problem with it. I'm acknowledging what it is. And women should be thankful to men for doing it instead of complaining that they're not doing enough to make women's lives comfortable. We live in one of the most privileged times to be a woman ever. I mean, you have even the fact that you're saying the biggest problem is that they have to raise their kids in the early years. You know how privileged that is? I mean, you have the option to put them in daycare. You have the option to delay motherhood. They made IVF for us. They gave you birth. Like, we have so many choices now, and we're still going to say they're not doing enough? That's bullshit.
Do you know how much work it takes to raise children?
I'm 1 of 10.
Yeah, so you should be
1 of 10 kids.
Okay, so here's my next question. Are your parents still married?
Yeah.
And wasn't your mom like a feminist on the UN who fought for women's rights at a global level?
Me and my mom don't agree on everything. What's your point?
Yeah, that she had 9 children and she's happily married as a feminist. So it seems like you should be fully aware and
she's
fully...
not a feminist. She took me to Sarah Palin rallies when I was a kid.
Okay,
I went to like pro-life rallies when I was 12.
Yeah, I mean,
they didn't come out of nowhere.
Right, but she also did advocate on a global level for like women's opportunities. So yeah, it seems like you should be fully...
Here's the thing, the internet only has half of that story. And I can't tell the full one just because it's not my place. So I can't really use that as I'm telling you, you're wrong though. That's not, if you had the full story, I just can't talk about it here.
Yeah, you say that a lot when people bring up your family, which is fine. But my main point is that you are not ignorant to these ideas. You are not ignorant to these arguments. Like, you on a global and personal level, like, are aware of them. So to say who cares, like, your mom cares, to say who cares, a lot of us care. And I think that it takes a lot of strength to care. And I think that it actually, to say, oh, I don't care, stop complaining, that's the easy way out. I don't want to take the easy way out. I think that being passionate about empathy is really like the strength. It takes strength to be sensitive. It takes strength to be vulnerable and transparent. I think that it's really easy, and it's the easy way out, to just be callous and to say we can't make change and I don't care about your feelings.
Okay, well, again, you can say that, but it doesn't change the reality of the world. And the thing is, if you want to be in a man's world, then be in it. And what women try to do is they go into a man's world and tell them how it should be different.
Yeah, because as you've recognized,
even though they've done none of the work,
it seems like are you interviewing me, or are we?
Even though they've done none of the work of building the society. But go ahead, sorry.
I would argue that our society would be better off if we did have a part in building it. Our society has been stagnated and has been held back because women have been held back. Imagine the prosperity and imagine the opportunity that the world would have if women weren't held back and women weren't stagnated. And you continuously complain about these things that men have to endure, and then simultaneously call it a men's world that women should be grateful to be a part of, but we should also be sensitive towards the things that they've built that are detrimental to themselves.
So the feminists who come in and do all the complaining about the man's world and complaining about the men who set up the entire world that they are enjoying all of the fruits of, and then using the circular argument of, well, if you got a problem with it, well, it was men who set it up. It's very hard to listen to. Imagine you're running a company, right? And the employees that you've got aren't actually capable of doing the really hard jobs. And you're there working 18 hours a day. You're scrubbing the toilets. You're doing the hard labor while the employees are sitting in the tea room complaining about you, complaining that you don't give them enough opportunities. And then you say, hey guys, listen, I've got to do all of these jobs because you aren't physically capable of doing it. And then they turn around and say, oh, well, you set it up that way, and if we set it up, it would be better. I mean, you can say that until you go blue in the face, but the reality of the situation is that women do play a much larger role in our institutions today. They are deeply embedded within the workforce, and the results of this that we are seeing are not great. Feminism has sold them a lie that if they don't have some career, then they're not achieving anything in life. And women are listening to this and they're putting off having children to go and pursue a career. And they think that at 35 years old, Prince Charming will come along and then they'll be able to have a few buzzer beater babies. And in many cases, this just does not happen. It's not working out for them, and it's not working out for men. And we have massively declining birth rates, and the family structure is getting torn apart. This is not good for society. This is the fundamental institution that creates a healthy society. Anyways, the next bit here is my favorite, very telling.
So what do you think men did historically? Like, what do you think their jobs were? Like 1800s, what were your choices as a man to do as a job? Because, you always talk about how women were held back historically. So I'm asking, like, what was life like back then?
Well, women had to stay home and men had to do all of the jobs because they didn't allow women to help them.
What were their jobs that they did? What were the most common methods of employment back then?
I mean, what do you mean? I mean, it's going to be construction, it's going to be medicine, it's going to be food production, it's going to be factories, it's going like the same thing that runs all of society.
So they had three choices: coal miner, farmer, factory worker.
Nothing else happened in society.
I'm not saying nothing else. That was the majority of how people were employed. So you guys have this like rewritten history where you guys think that men just had these glamorous, fun jobs, but men did the difficult job. Men know that they didn't enjoy their jobs. Do you think any guy is going to a coal mine and saying, wow, this is my passion? And
again, who set that system up?
It's not about who set it up. It's how would the system run without it? They need coal. At the time, they needed coal. Like the same way now, somebody has to build the buildings. Somebody has to get the food. Otherwise, society does not run.
Correct. And we're better off when women participate and when women are able to help men. Like, we talk about all of these like detrimental aspects of these harmful industries. And arguably, if we cared about how people felt, we were compassionate towards their experience, we would put more time and energy to improving these harmful industries. And if women had been allowed to enter into these industries earlier, you could argue that they would be safer industries because we have empathy and we want to value progression and we want to recognize problems and address them. We don't just see a problem and say, hey, that's a problem, and then sit on it. Like, no, you recognize a problem, you recognize what causes it, and you fix it.
Okay, so I told you about the crab fishing today. What are you going to do now?
As I said, that's not my job. There are people who are on, excuse me, if I could please speak.
Go ahead.
As I've said before, there are people on safety committees. There are people on workers' unions. There are people whose jobs are dedicated to worker safety. So if you're very passionate about that, you should probably invite one of them to sit down in the studio and ask them that question.
Okay, so nothing? You're not going to do anything about it?
Because that's not my job.
Okay. I'm just clarifying you're doing the same thing.
No, because I'm more than happy to recognize that it's a problem that should be addressed by somebody whose specialty it is to address that problem.
Okay, so the best bit of the video is when she says, well, men didn't let women help them.
If women had been allowed...
And this is completely historically accurate, guys. During the Industrial Revolution, women were lining up down the block with a pickaxe, a shovel, and a bucket at the ready, just waiting to be given the green light by those oppressive men to go down into that tunnel and just work 16 hours a day and get their share of the black lung. And it's the exact same thing during agricultural times. Before the steel plow was invented, of course, women were just waiting for their turn to be able to manually plow the fields, but men wouldn't let them. Anyways, guys, a sad story, sad note to leave it on, talking about this sort of level of oppression. But if you did enjoy it, guys, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to watch another video right here, and until next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.